welcome to Nerdcultuur, and today we're doing another video in English, and it's been a while since we last did it, but we're doing it because we're discussing the new Matt Walsh movie, Am I Racist? They released it to Daily Wire streaming service now, so I finally got a chance to see it, but this was their first movie that they also released in theaters in early September. I'm doing this review in English since the themes it tackles and the audience it's aimed at, it's more so for the American audience. And of course Europe has plenty of wokeness problems too, but I feel like the racial insanity hasn't reached the same levels here as it did during the BLM summer in 2020. Obviously with the last Matt Walsh documentary, he tackled the gender crisis and the whole gender industry that's attached to it, and it was a very critical and important movie. But this time he's aiming at another left-wing holy tenet in the form of the whole racial industry, and specifically the anti-racist movement. I think the movie made a very smart decision by starting off with a quote by Ibram X. Kendi where he says the only remedy for past discrimination is discrimination in the present. I think that gets to the core of this issue, because when I reviewed What is a Woman, I think I was still able to give the left-wing side of everything a bit more leeway, because back then I would just think they're misinformed or misguided, but they are at least well-intentioned. But I think this movie really gets to the heart of the evil that's really at the root here. And especially with these race grifters, I think they know that some of the things they're saying are quite ridiculous or at the very least hypocritical, but they're either just too far gone with the statements they've already made and they don't feel like backing down, or they just literally have a financial incentive to keep going. And that was another very smart decision by this movie to show every person's cash amount that they received in order to participate. And with amounts like that, it's very dubious that they're actually motivated by trying to make a change, and it's probably more so about the money that they're getting. And just like with What is a Woman, even talking about this movie is somewhat of a risk on its own, because I've seen the backlash Jeremy Johns got, for example. But I think he also made a very important point that this movie is kind of aimed to get the discussions going, and there's plenty of issues in this whole industry that definitely need to be addressed. And that's not to say racism doesn't exist or there's not still issues we're able to work towards solving, but I think everything that's attempted with this whole anti-racist grift just has the opposite effect. And that's one of the things that keeps coming forward in this movie too. Whenever he's talking to normal people, like most common people just kind of feel that not discussing race is probably the best way to deal with racism. And specifically when he's in the mainland of the United States, like in the most redneck hillbilly areas you could imagine, you would probably guess that there would be like the most racist stereotypes of a redneck there possible. But it would seem that even those people just have a good head on their shoulder and kind of approach every person they meet as an individual, which is always just the most fair approach. But one of the big differences between What is a Woman and Am I Racist is that they kind of changed the way Matt Walsh is positioned as the main character. Because I feel like in What is a Woman, he's kind of exploring everything and he's asking questions, but he tries to stay as neutral as possible. Whereas with Am I Racist, we kind of see his journey into becoming an anti-racist grifter all of his own. And every piece of advice that he's given along the way, you see him kind of incorporate in his own approach, and it always yields just hilarious results. And that's also just the best way to expose how ridiculous and crazy their ideas are when you actually follow them to their logical conclusions. And there's been a lot of articles written about certain scenes in this movie, but I figured some of those scenes would probably be the ones that stood out most to me, but I ended up being more surprised by some of the other ones. Like especially the whole ending of this movie, and as soon as Matt Walsh starts to give his own do the work workshop, you definitely see a whole other side of him that I didn't expect to see beforehand. There's actually a bit of a character arc and character development that makes it more of a narrative than you would normally get in an average documentary. And I know Matt Walsh is a controversial figure for his political take, but I just can't help but like the guy. He definitely has just a very dry sense of humor that I feel can click with a lot of people. And his deadpan delivery also ended up being responsible for some of the funniest moments in What is a Woman, and the same can definitely be said for Am I Racist. Like his DNA and brand of humor is all over this movie. And out of everybody in the whole Daily Wire cast, I feel like Matt Walsh would be the only person able to produce this movie in the way that it's been made now. And one of the things I commended What Is a Woman for is that they kind of tackled the issue from all sides of the industry and different positions that people are in. And the same can be said for Am I Racist, where he also just talks to regular people, both black and white, but then the most interesting scenes is when he's talking to the so-called experts. And it would have been great if he was able to get Ibram X. Kendi or Ta-Nehisi Coates in this movie as well, because I feel like they could have been challenged in a very fun way too. And that makes everything all the more impressive when he's actually able to join the race for dinner with Saira Rao, for example, who's definitely just an awful, horrible person. And of course the grandmother of the whole anti-racist movement, or at least from a white person's perspective, Robin DiAngelo, and she's also responsible for one of the best scenes in this movie. I feel like that's probably the one most articles have been written about, but still you actually have to see it in context to fully appreciate just how crazy that scene actually is. And then there was the scene where they reenacted the whole Jussie Smollett situation and This Is MAGA Country and that whole story, which definitely had me laughing my ass off. So even though they had released a lot of different scenes and previews, I still was able to enjoy the movie as a whole and walk away with a lot of new different moments that'll definitely stay with me for a while. And also the soundtrack to this movie is pretty great. You definitely have to give credit to Bryson Gray for all his new raps that are just thematically very on point for the scenes they're presented in. And I still haven't even mentioned another one of the most genius aspects of this movie, and that's just the blatant way that it's able to expose the whole grift in just a very basic and simple scene. And with What Is a Woman, that kind of came forward once you started to follow the money and you started to see all the money that's being spent on these transitions, whereas with Am I Racist, I feel like it's most apparent with the Moana problem, because this whole Moana problem hypothesis kind of exposes that really as white people, according to these anti-racist grifters, there's really not a good way to be. And so with the Moana problem, you get presented with two options, which is either you lean into the white princesses and you're centering your whiteness, which is racist of course, or you teach your children to like princesses of color, but at that point you're performing cultural appropriation, and that means you definitely can't buy a Moana costume for Halloween for your little girl, for example. And at that point, if both options kind of lead to you being labeled as a racist, I definitely can't blame white people for just throwing their hands up and being just like, I don't even know what to do anymore. He even asks during the movie multiple times, like, if I don't want this privilege, if I do want to decenter my whiteness, like, what are the things I can do? And most of the time the answer is just like, you can't do anything. So that makes the whole speech at the end of the movie extra on point, where he just kind of points out, like, we can be bitter about it and just be in our white guilt or in our victim narrative if you're a person of color, or we can just try to move forward and leave everything like that behind us. So yeah, I had a great time watching Am I Racist, and I may even like it just a little bit more than What Is a Woman. And I think that's mostly due to the whole Borat angle and Matt Walsh being more involved and interactive in this movie compared to the previous one. But I think both just did a phenomenal job of just exposing and destroying the left-wing industry that it's aimed at. So both the transgender movement and now the anti-racist movement are hopefully at an end because of these movies. We've seen it with the transgender movement, like the corner's definitely been turned on that. Like even the most woke presidential candidate so far, Kamala Harris, hasn't really been pushing for the whole transgender thing like she would have 4 years ago. So if Am I Racist can have even somewhat of a similar effect, hopefully we'll start to see the death of this whole anti-racist bullshit in the coming years as well. So yeah, definitely a movie worth checking out, even if you're not a conservative or a right-winger. I think even some fair liberals should be able to see the issues with this whole industry. And obviously this movie comes from a biased perspective, but they're not shy about promoting it as a Daily Wire movie, so you definitely know what you're getting into. I feel like just as a quality product, you definitely can't deny that it's well made and well thought out, and it presents the message it's trying to deliver in a very, very effective way. So yeah, if you're watching from the US, you may have had the chance to see Am I Racist in theaters, or otherwise you can find your way to find it online right now. So definitely let me know what you thought of this movie, or if you're planning on checking it out online soon. Thanks for watching my review anyway, and subscribe to this channel to keep up to date with everything going on in Nerdcultuur.